right, are you guys ready for Hank? Hank! Hank! Good, how you doing? Good. Is that good? Did I get it right? You got this, you know.
Yeah. Shrinking every day. Hi. Some have claimed to have witnessed souls leave the body of those who've just passed. Documented cases by hospice nurses, doctors, sometimes just faith-driven family members. I was always skeptical until I saw my grandfather's soul leave his body. My dad left when I was 14 years old. He wasn't a bad man, but he was ill and he was weak. But I had the good fortune of living with my grandparents, a really very loving set of grandparents. My grandmother ruled the nest. You know, she just was it. She was a chief petty officer. My grandfather was a magnificent human being. He was just simply a model of humanity. He never said a bad word about anyone. And given the fact that he was in Dachau concentration camp for 3.5 years, I always thought that he had reason to hate everyone, but no. Never said a bad word about anyone, even to those who deserved it. And that's if he used words at all, because he was a man of very few. When I was a kid growing up, I used to lay on the floor about 4:30 in the afternoon watching Leave It to Beaver, and every day he'd bring home a bag of M&Ms. And he'd stand over me while I'm laying on the floor watching M&Ms, 4 or 5 years old, and he'd shake the bag like this, just to let me know that he didn't forget me. When I was 14, I stole a cigarette from my mother, and I'm walking down the street in a snowstorm, literally, and my grandfather is walking toward me. I couldn't believe it. I was stunned, just totally stunned. And, you know, I'm caught. I'm here smoking a cigarette. I'm 14 years old. And he looks at me, and he simply does this. Never ratted on me. My fondest memory was a story that he told me when I was 5 years old until I was 26. The story was that he had a watch that he kept in his sock while he was in concentration camp. He was a young man. He was able to keep his clothing. And he hid it so the Nazis wouldn't find it. He also told me that it was a symbol of hope, that one day he'd run into my mother and my grandmother again. Now I'm 5 years old. I really don't know what he's talking about, but I loved him, and I listened to him. And he told me the story 21 times, because a few days after the 21st telling, when I was 26 years old, he was diagnosed with leukemia. At first, we were pretty optimistic because, after all, a lot of elderly people survive many forms of leukemia, but it wasn't to be. I was in his hospital room the last day of his life. My grandmother, my mother were out of the room, and I was there alone with my grandfather. We were smothered in silence. I was a few feet away from him, I remember, and I looked at him, and he turned cold, and then a soft blue hue, and then white. I knew it just happened. But I walked over to him, and I took my palm and I sort of hovered it over his face, hopefully to feel some sense of life. And I whispered to him, "Grandpa, Grandpa." At that moment, I felt a chill, and I saw an aura, the corner of my left eye. It was steam, not unlike the kind of steam that comes out of a tea kettle. It just lasted for a split second and then disappeared. A few days later, at his funeral, a very good friend of the family came up to me with a small box, cotton laced, and in it was that gold watch, the one from the story, the one that he told me all those years. Didn't even know he still had it. And under the watch was a little piece of scratch paper that read, "I love you," which was typical for him. No wasted words, simple, honest. You know, it's the season we think about our family, right? I mean, that's why this theme is so terribly important. And we think about special family members. My grandfather's soul was fueled by kindness and gentleness, but it hurt to watch it leave. Peace.